228 years ago, the founders of America created a form of government unlike any other. They created it because they saw their past form of government and they decided that they did not want to do that. They were ruled by one man, and they wanted their voices to be heard. So they wanted to have the same representation as everybody. They wanted to be ruled by a majority of the people instead of just one person or a small group of people. And they also wanted to have the same voting power as the person standing right next to them. They didn't want one person to have more of a weight than the other. And so they put these ideals into words and they created the U.S. Constitution. And this Constitution created most of the governmental systems that we have today. And most of these do follow these ideals of what a democracy is. But the Electoral College is not one of these systems. And my claim today is that the Electoral College is undemocratic. And my support for this is that it does not give one citizen the same voting power as another citizen in, say, a different state. And it can cause disproportionate representation, and it can vote contrary to the majority rule. So the first point is democracy exists when one man, in their words, equals one vote. And an example of this is one man in California doesn't have the same voting power as one man in Wyoming does. This is due to the Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929, which capped the House of Representatives at 435 members, which in turn capped the Electoral College at 535. Yes, technically each person in the California and Wyoming votes only once. We're not talking about someone going to the ballot box twice. We're talking about the weight of their vote. We're talking about their perceived amount of vote, the perceived voting power. So in this case, we'll look at it by the numbers. So in Wyoming, their population is 568,000 people, and they get 3 electoral votes. And this is according to the 2010 U.S. Census, which is 7 years out of date, so these numbers are a lot larger now. And then the California population is 37.3 million people, and it has 55 electoral votes. So one electoral vote in Wyoming is equal to 189,433 people, whereas one electoral vote in California is 678,181 people. This leads to a percentage-wise where a voting citizen in Wyoming has 370% more of a voting power than one citizen does in California. And the next point is that the Electoral College can indirectly cause disproportionate representation. It does this because of the fact that the Electoral College exists. States are required to proportion their electoral votes to candidates who win their popular vote. And so 48 out of the 50 states have a winner-take-all system where whoever wins their state's popular vote gets all of their electoral votes, which can cause malapportionment. An example of which is if we have 2 candidates, candidate A and candidate B, and they run in California, for instance, who has, as I said earlier, 37.3 million people. If they split the votes 18.66 million to candidate A and 18.64 million to candidate B, candidate A has the majority in that point and wins all 55 electoral votes. Then say they go to another state which has 16 electoral votes. Candidate A wins 10,000 of the popular vote, and candidate B wins 40,000. Candidate B obviously wins the popular vote and there's 16 electoral votes. But then when you look at the popular vote in total, you have candidate B with 10,000 more votes than candidate A, but way less. They have 16 electoral votes compared to their 55, which leads to a malproportionment, because if it was proportioned correctly, then the electoral votes would show the proportion of the population that voted for each. Which leads me to my next point, that this does not, the Electoral College does not always follow the majority rule and the majority of the people. Technically, the Electoral College does follow the majority rule in itself. You need to get 270 out of 535 of the Electoral College, but that's not where the problem lies. The problem lies with the voting majority of the people, the voting population, because everything else, practically everything else we use, it all goes off of the voting population, the voting majority. When we have their senators or representatives, it's all the voting population. It's not in this case, the electors. And so this has happened 5 times in 57 elections when the winner of the popular vote has lost the Electoral College, and that's a failure rate in this case of 8.77%. And it has happened, as I said, 5 times. So in 1824 was the first time it happened, then 1876, then 1888, 2000, and 2016. So it is possible that it's statistically significant at 8.77% failure rate. That's still not a good failure rate. At the same time, it might be showing a trend. It depends on statistical significance. In conclusion, I just wanted to say that based off of the evidence I provided tonight, I hope that you can all agree with me that the Electoral College is undemocratic because it does not follow one person, one vote. It can create malapportionment, and it can also not vote correctly with the majority rule, which are all things that our founding fathers definitely had in mind. And obviously they couldn't see this happening, but it is definitely something that has become more and more undemocratic as time has gone on.
All right, the solid things, the propositions identified very clear. There's a good preview. The structure of the speech is easy to follow. I like the factual data that you've got in the presentation. You make some comparisons that are easy to understand. Some things are a little bit problematic. I'm not sure that there's much dispute that occasional non-representative, at least in the way you've described it, as not being the majority, elections come about. That part is true, but that's not controversial. So the inference is that it's undemocratic. And I think you need to have a stronger argument about what democracy means, and that's probably where the dispute's going to be from the refutation speaker, because there's no denying that it's not necessarily one man, one vote, but is that necessarily the criteria on which we should define democracy, especially when we have the system of government that we operate under. And when you refer back to the founding fathers, remember the reason that some of these things existed were for compromises that would allow the country to exist in the first place, because at one point, we were lucky to have the idea of a single country. The states were all very independent of one another. The question then becomes, what is the role of the states in the process? And I think that's the part that you've neglected to develop a little bit. Your explanations are clear and easy to follow. I think you do a good job speaking to the audience. You present your hypotheticals very effectively, so it makes it easy for people to understand. But like I said, the notion that something is undemocratic because the majority doesn't get their way, I think there are a lot of people in the world who say, you know what, that's a good thing, because the world's full of tyrannies that are run by the majority. Mob rule is one of the things that people are worried about, and that's, there ought to be checks on that, and that's one of the arguments, is that this is kind of a check against the tyranny of the majority, is so they say. Is democracy just about majority rule? That's the criteria that you're presenting, and if you're going to make that as the argument, I think you need to make a stronger argument for that particular point. All right, thank you.